Hi, you're with Peter Carr and Scott Stewart. Welcome to LonghausTV. Today we're doing a follow-up episode on our 2012 Trusted Infrastructure as a Service Cloud study that we've recently finished in March this year. One of the key findings for us was this segmentation in the cloud market. We think it's really, it's emerged for the first time since 2009 when cloud really first started to appear in Australia. So what we found was that there are essentially six key segments, six key market segments on the supplier side, on the vendor side. And these become very important filters for the way that end user organisations are starting to select their providers based on their particular requirements. So Scott, why don't you just quickly take us through what these six segments are?
Sure. So we have, I guess, the traditional utility cloud computing offerings. So we're calling that the pure play platform providers.
Okay.
So I guess, Amazon comes to mind, that kind of model of utility computing, swipe and go, although Amazon we have an interesting story in that space.
Yeah, so this is the pure play infrastructure as a service provider.
That's right.
Okay.
Then we found that there was another segment that sort of moving from utility across the services, and that's the key point, is one sort of at the utility end, the polar, the other one is around the high touch services. So, we're finding that there are vendors who are going, well, we want to offer more than just pure play platform, we want to add some services. So there's these value add providers.
Okay, so this is market segment number 2, value add providers.
So we put a Mantra, Fujitsu, those sorts of companies in there. So basically, this is where they provide much more than just pure play. They add a whole lot of layers of additional services. It might be email, it might be file shares, it might be like Ninefold, the Dropbox. They're adding whole lots of new features.
It does go just beyond providing email, right? Because we're seeing
Absolutely.
a lot of this as being the basis of cloud. So we'll talk about the vendor names a bit later, but what's the name of the third market segment?
Service aggregators.
Okay.
So these are providers who actually themselves don't deliver infrastructure as a service, but they aggregate those other providers and put it together, add their own IP, their own services, their own development even, and basically go to market and solve business solution problems based on sort of the aggregation of all these technology solutions.
Okay, and this may be, we're starting to get into the space where the end user organisation may not actually be looking for cloud-based services, but this aggregator through which they have a great relationship is starting to bring these as part of the offering.
Then we found there was a much smaller group of cloud brokers. So the brokers, so basically, you might go, well, they're similar to aggregators. They are and they aren't, but they basically introduce, if you like, preferred supplier arrangements directly to their clients. So as a broker, they have a whole portfolio of cloud services, and they have a book of clients, and they introduce them, and they provide direct access. The key thing about the broking is that it's largely around the billing. It's the billing provision. It's the sort of intermediary services that you'd expect from a broker.
Yeah, sure. Yes, it's a business broker.
That's right.
Yeah. So okay. So the fifth segment.
IT as a service.
So this is probably the segment of the market which has been, what cloud has been all about.
That's right, and it highlights so much the difference between the two ends of the scale and how we're a cloud broker, cloud vendor, how different it is. Because in the IT as a service space, it's much more, I guess, it's a mix of that sort of SI, systems integrator model. It's managed services. It's the whole transformational cloud message. In other words, this is our current environment. What's the roadmap? What's the strategy? What are the tactical things we can do to get from A to B? So even down to professional services, even down to maybe taking on a managed service agreement initially.
Yeah, right. So this is the IT as a service is really the future state of the legacy or traditional sourcing and or managed services relationships that organisations have had. So if you're a very large end user organisation and your outsourcing relationship is coming up, or your offshoring contract, or even your managed services contract, and you're looking at an expanded portfolio, or you're even looking at, as we're seeing with a lot of organisations, selectively sourcing different capabilities for different part of your business portfolio, then this is where we're seeing the IT as a service vendors come in, because it's not a one vendor fits all, is it? Especially for the large organisations. I just do not recall the last time I saw a one vendor approach.
No, but for a long time there, that a lot of the vendors were taking that marketing approach, weren't they? I mean, as a CIO, I remember seeing the folders fan fold out across the table, and they do everything from one end to the other, and they really took the approach of, we can be your one single IT vendor. But I think with cloud, I just can't see that that's going to.
No, and we're certainly seeing that, aren't we, in this space? Because if you're an IT as a service cloud provider, then you may have a business relationship with a pure play cloud provider, or even some of these other value adds for the areas that you're not focusing on. Okay, so that's 5. What is the 6th?
Business as a service, and you can't ignore it. It's increasing in prevalence, and the business really understands this. So this is the IT as a service model that's gone business crazy. You know what I mean? It's delivering an end-to-end business process. It doesn't talk about memory, utilization or CPU or storage costs. It doesn't talk about cloud as such. It basically saying to the business, we'll manage an end-to-end business process, and we'll charge a business transaction price. So we'll charge, $10 per policy that's been produced, or per phone call, per parcel delivered, per
50 cents per invoice issued to a client, those sorts of things.
Right.
So these are the sorts of conversations that CEOs are having with cloud, aren't they? They really, you're right, they don't want to talk about utilisation, they don't want to talk about CPUs, they don't give a toss about the pure play view of cloud. So this business as a service is kind of this Uber service end of the spectrum. And importantly, that across these whole 6 spectrums, or these whole 6 segments, cloud technology is important to all of them. And so this is what we mean by it's not a one-size-fits-all market anymore.
Exactly right. So the different service delivery models that we hear about, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, well, they don't replace hosting, managed service, co-location, outsourcing. In actual fact, they enable those different service delivery models to be implemented. IT as a service, business as a service. And I think on the IT as a service front, we'll see the internal IT department being tasked with becoming an IT as a service operator. In other words, providing a service into their own organisation that's cost effective, that's able to compete and be commercially viable.
Yeah, and so, rather than this thinking being out of step with the market, I just do not think you can look at the cloud market today with this myopic lens. It really is, from a purchasing perspective, from a customer perspective, they're coming at it from one of these 6 different ways. So now let's take a look at the market. Let's look at the 2012 Cloud Pulse and look at the vendors that we think pop up in each of these segments, because what it actually does, this provides you 6 different ways to look at the 2012 Cloud Pulse, doesn't it? And these are, we believe, the 6 different ways that end user organisations are starting to look at these vendors. So it becomes very important. So let's throw up the pulse. And so first of all, at the pure play end, Scott, just talk us through the vendors that are here.
So we have Amazon Web Services, Ninefold, Rackspace, Flux, Ultraserve.
So there'd be quite a few in there that people would recognise as the traditional ones. Okay, so let's take a look at the second view now. So the segment of value adds. We see there's far less in this space.
Yeah, there is. So, Mantra, Dimension Data, Hostworks, Uber Global, interesting company in down south, Interactive, and Fujitsu, of course.
Yeah, sure. So, Fujitsu, again, in the top 5 of this study, certainly in the value add space. I think we'll see some of these vendors too, probably potentially appearing in more than one. So I think Fujitsu would argue that they also do the IT as a service. And similarly, Telstra is sort of arguing that point as well. Yeah, sure.
So,
yeah, and there's certainly, there's counter arguments for both those organisations, I think, but certainly as an initial filter, I think this gives us a great snapshot. So let's combine the 3rd and 4th segment: service aggregators and brokers.
Yeah, so let me talk about a very small provider based to services in Melbourne. Really interesting. They aggregate. They bring Amazon, Google Docs, Salesforce. All those types of cloud services and have their own IP that they add to them, and they're solving a lot of business solutions. A very successful model.
And then if you kind of look at the difference between the service aggregation and the broker, Wipro obviously very strong performer this year. Not very well known in cloud, but this is one of these companies you scratch below the surface, and you know these guys are really a stellar service provider. And then Emphasis as a broker down the other end. So the fifth space, this IT as a service, this is probably going to be a real key area of focus next year, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think that this probably warrants, you know, almost a separate study next year. It's just becoming such a complex and, you know, vast area. But you have your IBM, your CSC, of course, Datacom, HP, you know, the six...
Got some great Australian companies in there as well.
Yeah, we mentioned Area 9 in our previous episode, won the Rising Star Award. 6Wise, you know, Trusted Cloud, which is now a TPG subsidiary, and OBT, yeah.
And I guess the final one, business as a service. So, you know, this is kind of at that bleeding edge, right? And some of these companies weren't even on the pulse last year, and I think, you know, that was Unisys as an example. You know, we're still deciding whether or not they'd be a pure play. They've clearly decided not to be a pure play, except with, you know, they're a perfect example of, you know, a company that has their own mainframes, their own servers. You know, they ship a lot of hardware, but they're not playing in that space. They're really playing at that business as a service space.
And TCS, Tata is another example. You know, in a sense, you sort of almost would need to, you know, try and encourage these companies to participate in a study on infrastructure as a service, because they just don't see themselves as that. They're the business as a service. They deliver insurance policies. You know, they produce them. They do the end-to-end process. They do it exceptionally well. Yeah. And they do it at a very cost-effective manner using infrastructure as a service.
Right. These are the traditional transactional processing technology companies that we're seeing. So there you go. That kind of wraps up you know, 6 different ways to use the Longhouse Trusted Infrastructure as a Service Pulse this year. Certainly ways and conversations that we're having with clients to help filter out at which point or for which particular project or service different vendors are showing their relevance, I guess. And so you'll find much deeper explanation of this particular topic in our report, and here's the link to that. And I think that kind of wraps up the marketing segments for cloud in 2012. Was that there are essentially 6 key segments, 6 key market segments on the supplier side, on the vendor side. And these become very important filters for the way that end user organisations are starting to select their providers based on their particular requirements. So Scott, why don't you just quickly take us through what these 6 segments are?
Sure. So we have, I guess, moving from utility across the services, and that's the key point, is one sort of at the utility end, the polar, the other one is around the high touch services. So, you know, we're finding that there are vendors who are going, well, we want to offer more than just pure play platform, we want to add some services. So there's these value add providers.
Okay, so this is market segment number 2, value add providers.
So we put a Mantra, Fujitsu, those sorts of companies.
Hi, you're with Peter Carr and Scott Stewart. Welcome to LonghausTV. Today we're doing a follow-up episode on our 2012 Trusted Infrastructure as a Service Cloud study that we've recently finished in March this year. One of the key findings for us was this segmentation in the cloud market. You know, we think it's really, it's emerged for the first time since 2009 when cloud really first started to appear in Australia. So what we found...
The traditional utility cloud computing offerings, so we're calling that the pure play platform providers. Okay. So I guess, you know, Amazon comes to mind, that kind of model of utility computing, you know, swipe and go, although Amazon have an interesting story in that space.
Yeah, so this is the pure play infrastructure as a service provider.
That's right.
Okay.
Then we found that there was another segment that sort of moving